The air in the small southern town hung thick and hot even after sundown, smelling of parched dust and the faint, sickly sweetness of kudzu gone wild. 2,000 miles from any city worth mentioning, it nestled in a hollow like a forgotten coin, its population, a steady 1,240 souls, with no significant change from seasonal visitors, a number carved into the peeling paint of the welcome sign just off Highway 17. Time did not so much pass here as congeal, each day a sticky replica of the last. The hours were marked by the drone of cicadas and the distant clang of the lumber mill's shift change. The profound stillness of the place dragged on its inhabitants, stretching them thin, making each day feel like a week, not because of peace, but from sheer oppressive slowness. Thomas Gray lived at the edge of that stillness, where the last paved road gave way to cracked asphalt, then gravel, and finally, the encroaching, whispering darkness of the woods. His house was a modest square affair, painted a faded hunter green that blended into the pines, humble as a hermit's prayer. Locals, when they spoke of him at all, called him Old Thomas, the quiet one, or the hermit out by the quarry. They pointed to the sharp planes of his face, his eyes revealing more than his words, and chalked it up to his solitary nature, his rough-hewn life on the fringes. He was a man made of angles, sharp as granite, and his silence was as deep and ancient as the forest itself. Beyond his property, where the woods grew thicker, sat the abandoned zoo. It appeared on no maps, not officially, but everyone knew it. A spectral ruin of concrete and rust, it stood sentinel at the lip of an old limestone quarry, a gaping maw in the earth. The access road, a snake of crumbling blacktop, choked with weeds that clawed through the cracks. Beyond that, a maze of overgrown paths, choked with thorny vines and fallen leaves, led to the rusted skeletons of cages. Crude and faded graffiti blighted the cracked concrete walls. Drawings of grinning devils, declarations of adolescent love, names of kids long since moved away or gone missing from the town's quiet life. In the long, hot afternoons, children dared each other to explore its shadowy corners, their whispers echoing among the empty enclosures. Teenagers, emboldened by cheap beer and foolish courage, sneaked in after dark, seeking a thrill, a scare. They found only the empty silence of the ruin. But Thomas did. Every night, without fail, as the last sliver of twilight bled from the western sky, Thomas Gray began his rounds. This was no patrol of a security guard checking locks and gates. Thomas paid no mind to the rusted padlocks or the buckling chain link. He moved with a practiced fluidity, a near-silent grace that spoke of instinct more than training. His feet, shod in worn leather boots, moved silently on loose gravel and slick moss. He was a shadow among shadows, his senses reaching out into the oppressive darkness like tendrils. He checked no locks. He listened. He listened for the subtle scrape of claw on concrete that belonged to no known animal, the soft, wet rasp of a breath that issued from something other than a deer. He sniffed the air, sorting through the usual night smells, pine needles, damp earth, the decay of summer, for something else, something wrong. The faintest tang of ozone, the metallic tang of fresh blood, the musky, ancient odor of something that had never been truly alive, yet breathed. His nostrils flared, sorting through the currents of the night air, searching for the telltale signature of disturbed containment. He picked out the scent of a newly shed scale, a drop of ectoplasm, a strand of hair that was neither human nor beast, existing beyond any known classification, inside the crumbling enclosures, where the darkness was deepest. Brief, horrifying vignettes caught the edge of his senses. A frantic, rhythmic scratching, like nails on a blackboard amplified 100 times, emanated from a pit that once held lions. A low, guttural chittering, a sound that vibrated in the very air itself, carried words no human throat could form, emanating from the cracked concrete bunker that used to house the gorillas. Heavy, wet breathing, ragged and desperate, came from a murky pool where the alligators had once sunned themselves. In the absolute blackness, just beyond the reach of his old dim flashlight beam, tiny pinpricks of light gleamed back at him. Eyes. These were not the reflective gleam of a raccoon or an owl, but something else entirely. Something cold, something hungry. They flickered into existence for a split second, then vanished, leaving only the chilling certainty that something unspeakable lurked in the depths. This was his burden, his self-imposed sentence. The old agreement, as he called it. A promise made decades ago to a shadowy, now vanished agency that had dabbled in things that defied disturbance. They were gone, dissolved like smoke, leaving Thomas to guard their mistakes. He was a caretaker, a reluctant warder of biological anomalies, monstrous creations that defied classification. His personal motivation, his sacrifice, was to keep the world safe from them, and them from the world. It was an exhausting, thankless job, a ceaseless vigilance that gnawed at his soul, leaving him perpetually weary, always on edge. Tonight, the weariness was different. It overlaid with a rising tension, a familiar hum beneath his skin that had nothing to do with the night air. A tremor in his hands, a deep ache in his bones, a quickening of his pulse. The moon, a fat, gibbous disk, swelled in the sky, 3/4 full, bathing the overgrown paths in a silver light that made the shadows even deeper, more ominous. These were the familiar signals of the approaching full moon and its ancient cycle of transformation. His senses sharpened, painfully so, every sound a hammer blow, every scent a chemical explosion. An uncontrollable desire to shed his skin, to unleash the primal energy coiled within, surged through him. He felt the wildness rising, clawing its way up from the depths of his being. He needed to prepare for this night. He needed to secure himself. His special room, reinforced with steel plates and thick, sound-deadening insulation, waited. A self-made prison for the beast within. But as he made his final sweep, turning back towards the relative safety of his own property, a new scent drifted on the sluggish breeze. Thin, unnatural. It was something burnt and sickly sweet, something that belonged neither to the forest nor to any local creature. It was human, yes, but alien, carrying a faint, unsettling tang of something synthetic, something metallic, from a laboratory. Then he saw it, barely discernible in the moonlight, a faint track, a boot print, too clean, too precise. It was not the worn, familiar tread of any local, nor the paw print of any animal. It was an unfamiliar human print. It led away from the zoo, back towards the town, skirting the main road, a silent herald of an encroaching threat. The quiet was about to break. The next day, the air in town was the same, thick with humidity and the smell of cut grass. But Thomas felt the change coming, a subtle shift in the weave of the world. He moved through his morning routine with spectral quiet, his senses still singing with the after-effects of the moon's pull, his thoughts a tangled knot of worry. The town, for its part, went about its business with the predictable rhythm of a well-worn clock. Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias drooped a little in the heat, just as they did every July. The old men gathered at the hardware store, leaning on rusted barrels, spinning tales that grew taller with each retelling. They talked about the drought, the price of lumber, the scandalous affair between the new postman and the mayor's youngest daughter. Their gossip was the lifeblood of the place, a slow, steady pulse that kept the heart of the town beating. Thomas, as always, was a topic of mild amusement, a harmless eccentric. "Hurdle Thomas was out walking in the woods last night, mumbling to himself," one old-timer said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "He was just talking to the trees." Another chuckled. They never looked deeper, never questioned the odd hours he kept, the way he disappeared into the very fabric of the forest. The town preferred its strangeness at a distance, a local legend to trot out on slow nights. And there were legends, whispers mostly, about the old zoo. Nobody officially remembered its origin or its closure. It simply faded into obscurity, like an old photograph left in the sun. Kids knew. They told stories about it around campfires, eyes wide with imagined terror. The empty cages where things that were not animals lived. The whispering walls that stole thoughts. Adults preferred to steer clear. If one brought it up, a quick shake of the head followed, a muttered "best left alone," or an uneasy reference to strange experiments that occurred out there decades ago, rumors of a scientist who kept wild beasts of a kind no one had ever seen. Most folks figured it was a run-down attraction that had gone bust, another forgotten piece of the landscape. They certainly did not connect it to the unsettling disappearances that plagued the town years ago. The farmer's dog that vanished without a trace, the calf found drained of blood, the faint, unidentifiable tracks near the creek after a heavy rain. Those were always chalked up to coyotes or some kind of big cat, despite no such animals having been seen in the region for generations. Thomas, meanwhile, underwent his own internal shift. The early stages of the transformation, even when he was not fully changed, sharpened him, honed his every sense. He felt the landscape around him. He did not just see it. His nose, already sensitive, now picked up the individual scent of every leaf, every insect, every nuance of decay and growth. He heard the burrowing of a beetle beneath the soil, the faint tremor of a squirrel leaping from branch to branch a quarter-mile away. His vision, even in the dimming afternoon light, picked out details a hawk would envy. He became the hunter, assessing his territory, every inch of it a known quantity, a map etched into his bones. He knew where the old owl nested, where the deer typically grazed, where the lone bobcat denned. Now he searched for the disruption, the false note in the symphony of the wild. The internal struggle was an ancient one. He was not a wizard, was not cursed by some ancient spell. This was a biological mutation, a painful, raw, primordial force that convulsed his very cells. It felt like being flayed alive from the inside out, every nerve ending screaming as his body rearranged itself. The beast, wild and untamed, clamored for release, for blood, for the raw freedom of the hunt. But Thomas the man understood the immense responsibility of control. He kept the beast leashed, not just for his own sake, but for the safety of the town, of the world beyond the woods. He was a fragile barrier, a human dam against a torrent of unknowable horror. He had spent decades maintaining the delicate ecosystem within the zoo. Even in his human form, he understood the creatures, their instincts, their bizarre needs, their shifting moods. Each monster was a unique, self-contained system, a biological anomaly demanding precise calibration. There was the skitterer, who needed total darkness and a constant supply of organic matter. The shrieker, whose vocalizations required specific acoustic dampeners to prevent them from rupturing human eardrums for miles around. And then there was Silent Number 7. It was a scaly, gray-green humanoid, its eyes like polished river stones, utterly devoid of pupils or irises. It never made a sound, not a whisper, not a sigh. But it felt. It communicated not through words, but through thoughts, impressions, feelings that resonated in Thomas's mind like a tuning fork. It was an indicator, a barometer, sensing changes in the environment, reacting to even the slightest disturbance. Lately, Silent Number 7 vibrated with a low, incessant hum of unease, a constant thrum of anxiety that grated on Thomas's own nerves. Its instability frightened him, more than any other creature in his care. As the sun began its final slow descent, painting the western sky in bruised purples and bloody oranges, Thomas felt the shift deepen. It was not just his body or the unease from Number 7. The forest itself was too quiet. The usual evening chatter of cicadas, the faint rustle of foraging animals, the chirping of crickets, all muted, almost entirely absent. The predators he knew had gone silent. The birds had hushed their songs. This was the deep quiet that preceded a storm, the silence that blankets a grave. He felt the full onset of the transformation begin just as the first stars pricked the indigo canvas of the sky. The ache in his bones intensified, became a grinding, tearing agony. His skin felt too tight, too small, stretching and ripping as the new form pushed through. A raw, guttural growl tore from his throat, human one moment, then deeper, wider, a sound that belonged to the wild. His teeth elongated, sharpened, his vision blurred then snapped into focus, seeing the world in shades of green and gray, every detail heightened, every scent an instruction. When the last spasm passed, a massive, gray-furred form stood panting in the twilight, steam rising from its matted coat. It was a wolf, larger than any wolf on earth, its shoulders rippling with corded muscle, its eyes glowing with an ancient predatory intelligence. Thomas was gone, replaced by the alpha, the protector, the hunter, and the hunt began. But this was no ordinary hunt for deer or rabbit. He moved like a gray blur through the underbrush, his paws thudding silently on the forest floor, his head low, scenting the air. He found them near the boundary of his territory just as the moon climbed higher, a cold, indifferent eye in the heavens. Human tracks, fresh. They led straight from the road through a patch of dense scrub and right up to the edge of the abandoned zoo's perimeter. Clinging to the air around them, faint but unmistakable, was the same unfamiliar scent he had caught the night before. That metallic, synthetic tang, a scent of something processed and artificial that had no place in the primal green heart of the woods. A stranger, an invader. The quiet was about to break, and the breaking would be brutal. The old bus, its faded paint peeling like sun-scalded skin, exhaled a wheezing sigh as it pulled to a stop at the town's only intersection. A cloud of black exhaust choked the humid air, then drifted away, leaving only the smell of diesel and damp earth. Alice Crow stepped down onto the cracked asphalt, a reporter's satchel slung over her shoulder, a determined glint in her sharp blue eyes. She was independent, ambitious, the kind of journalist who chased stories not for a byline, but because something in her gut told her there was more to the world than met the eye. Her cover story, neatly folded in her purse, spoke of a feature on America's quietest towns, a human interest piece designed to lull the locals into a false sense of security. Her true mission, however, was far more unsettling. She investigated the strange, persistent rumors of anomalies that clung to this forgotten corner of the South like kudzu to a gravestone. Her first few days were a blur of small-town rituals. She nursed lukewarm coffee at the diner, watched the old men play checkers on the shaded porch of the general store, and blended into the sleepy rhythm of the place. She smiled politely, listened patiently to tales of fishing and garden woes, and then subtly she began to ask her questions. Her inquiries were not about the weather or the price of feed. Instead, she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially, asking about strange noises after dark, out towards the old quarry, and unusual disappearances of pets or livestock. She mentioned stories about giant tracks near the creek, her eyes wide with manufactured curiosity. The reactions were always the same. A moment of baffled silence, a nervous chuckle, then a dismissive wave of the hand. "Just coyotes, ma'am, or a bear that wandered down from the mountains," the diner owner said, wiping down the counter with a practiced circular motion. "Lots of wild critters in these parts," the old men affirmed, their eyes darting away, not quite meeting hers. They were good liars, masters of denial. Alice had seen it before. Small towns, like tightly woven blankets, kept their secrets close. She spent long hours in the town's tiny public library, the air smelling of old paper and dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The librarian, a woman with a severe bun and spectacles perched on her nose, watched Alice with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Alice, undeterred, delved into the archives, poring over brittle yellowed newspapers and dusty police reports. She was not looking for headlines, but for patterns. A rash of missing household pets in the winter of '87, followed by a farmer reporting mutilated cattle in the spring. A hiker vanished near the quarry trail in '92, his disappearance attributed to a tragic accident despite no body ever being found. Another string of unexplained livestock deaths 2 years ago, dismissed as wild animal attacks despite the curious lack of typical predator signs. Alice circled the dates, drew connections. A grim mosaic slowly took shape in her mind. At night, when the town finally succumbed to its deep, humid slumber, Alice prepared for her true work. Her rented room, nondescript and smelling faintly of disinfectant, transformed into a makeshift command center. From the depths of her satchel, she extracted professional-grade equipment. A compact parabolic microphone, capable of picking up a whisper from 100 yards away. A thermal imager, its lens gleaming coldly in the dim light. And a high-definition night vision camera, its infrared illuminator ready to pierce the black. Stealthily, under the cover of the dense southern night, she slipped out, navigating the winding back roads and overgrown trails. She set up her devices on the outskirts of town, strategically placed near the edge of the sprawling forest, and, most importantly, around the perimeter of the abandoned zoo. It was during these nocturnal excursions that she first noticed Thomas Gray. He was a phantom, appearing and disappearing at odd hours, a silent figure melting into the tree line. She watched him from a distance, her thermal imager picking up the strange, cold aura around him, a stark contrast to the heat signatures of the surrounding wildlife. His movements were too precise, too deliberate for a simple stroll. She saw him vanish into the dark maw of the zoo grounds, only to re-emerge hours later, his silhouette indistinct against the rising moon. He was a man with a secret, she knew it. And secrets, to Alice, were like magnets. One night, drawn by a strange, subtle hum in the air, Alice ventured deeper than usual, skirting the edge of the old cemetery that bordered the zoo's southern fence. The air here was heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and ancient. She moved slowly, carefully, her night vision camera held steady. Then she saw him, a massive gray form, too large for any wolf she had ever seen, its fur bristling under the faint starlight. Thomas. He dragged something that writhed and twisted, translucent and slick, like a giant, half-formed larva, glowing faintly with an internal, sickly light. It made no sound, but its movements were accompanied by a low, subsonic vibration that resonated in Alice's chest, making her teeth ache. The creature was long, many-limbed and horrifyingly fluid, its form constantly shifting, blurring at the edges. Thomas, in his monstrous lupine shape, moved with a grim determination, dragging the thing towards a cluster of overgrown cages. Alice's breath caught in her throat, a cold knot of terror blooming in her stomach. Thomas, in his beast form, was aware of her. He felt the shift in the air, the faint scent of human fear, the subtle, electronic hum of her equipment. His instincts screamed danger, a primal warning to chase down the intruder, to eliminate the threat. But something in the man part of his brain, the part that still held on to logic and reason, overrode the instinct. He knew this scent, this precise level of caution, this particular brand of technological intrusion. This was not some foolhardy teenager. He continued his grim work, dragging the writhing creature back to its confinement. He noted her stealth, her professional gear, the way she froze when he paused, her heart beating a frantic drum in the night. She was not ordinary. She was something else entirely. Alice's finger, trembling, hit the capture button on her camera, then again and again. The screen glowed with the ghostly green images, the massive wolf, the writhing, translucent creature, its unearthly vibrations almost visible in the infrared spectrum. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. Fear warred with a wild, exhilarating triumph. She had found it. She had found something incredible, something horrifying, something that would turn the world on its head. She knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones that Thomas Gray was not just a caretaker. His beasts were not mere animals. Her quiet little assignment became the story of a lifetime, a story that would put her life at grave risk. Thomas felt the shift in the air, the subtle but unmistakable ripple of disturbance around his sanctuary. The raw data of his senses, the faint, lingering scent of Alice's fear, the subtle electronic buzz of her recording devices hidden in the underbrush, the way the nightbirds had paused their songs at her approach, all coalesced into a single undeniable truth. His meticulously constructed wall of isolation had been breached. For decades he had existed in the shadows, a forgotten guardian of forgotten horrors. Now a fragile, determined woman with a camera had stumbled into his world, A slow, cold rage began to simmer in his gut, a familiar companion to his deeper, more profound anxiety. He spent the next day dissecting her, not with a scalpel, but with the honed blades of his senses and his intellect. He pictured her as she had been in the town, a deceptively ordinary woman with an extraordinary light in her eyes. He recalled the quiet intensity of her questions at the diner, the way her gaze lingered on the old newspaper clippings in the library. He thought of her equipment, sophisticated and clearly professional grade. She was no casual sightseer, no thrill-seeking teenager. Her persistence, the single-minded focus he had observed in her movements around the zoo's perimeter, spoke of something far more dangerous. She was not just curious, she was driven. In his world, driven curiosity led to catastrophe. He saw her not just as a threat to himself, to the careful facade he maintained, but as a catalyst for disaster, a danger to his creatures, and ultimately to the unsuspecting town itself. His internal conflict, a constant undertow in his life, surged to the surface. He questioned his role. Was he a protector, standing between worlds, preventing untold horror from spilling forth? Or was he simply a jailer, a keeper of abominations, a man hiding secrets that, in the light of day, would be seen as crimes against nature? To Alice and to the world she represented, he was the latter. He was a madman, a monster himself. The thought clawed at him, tearing at the thin veneer of his humanity, a conflict exacerbated by the raw, untamed nature that stirred beneath his skin. His lycanthropic curse was not just a physical transformation. It was a constant reminder of the thin, shifting line between man and beast, between order and chaos. The breach forced him to heighten his vigilance to an almost unbearable degree. He moved with spectral quiet through the labyrinthine corridors of the zoo, conducting additional checks of every single enclosure. He did not just glance at the locks, he tested them, felt the give and strain of the rusted metal, checking for any new weakness. He reinforced the bars where he found rust, patched, crumbling concrete with quick-drying epoxy he kept on hand. He rigged his own, crude but effective, early warning system. Tripwires of fine fishing line, pressure plates hidden beneath leaves, motion sensors salvaged from old security systems, all connected to a silent alarm in his house. Every inch of the zoo's perimeter, every access point, was now under his personal, relentless scrutiny. He needed to know every breath, every rustle, every trespass. He spent more time with Silent Number 7, the scaly humanoid whose thoughts resonated in his mind like a low, mournful cello. The creature, usually a placid, contemplative presence, now pulsed with a low, thrumming anxiety. It functioned as a living seismograph, its every vibration a premonition of disturbance. Thomas ran a hand, calloused and rough, over its cool, slick scales, soothing its agitation, understanding the source of its growing unrest. He felt the creature's fear, its deep-seated apprehension, and it chilled him to the bone. Number 7 was an indicator, a living barometer of the fragile balance he maintained. Its instability was a terrifying harbinger. Fragments of his past, long buried under layers of duty and isolation, surfaced, sharp and vivid as shards of broken glass. He remembered the earliest days of the zoo, the frantic, desperate efforts to contain the experiments gone wrong. He remembered the agency, shadowy and ruthless, their cold scientific curiosity that had birthed these horrors. He remembered the first attempts to liberate the creatures, attempts that invariably led to bloodshed and unmitigated disaster. The images flashed in his mind, the screaming, the tearing, the sudden, impossible disappearances. This was why he had taken on this burden, why he had locked himself away with these nightmares. Revealing them, letting the world see, invited a repeat of those catastrophes. He could not allow it. Not now. Not ever. He became a hunter in the day as well as the night, his prey Alice Crow. He began a silent, meticulous surveillance of his own. He watched her from the shadows, tracking her movements through the sleepy town. He observed her contacts, the way she paused to talk to certain locals, the casual questions she still posed. He noted her habits, the same booth at the diner, the same time she left the library. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands when she thought no one was watching, the way her gaze darted to the woods, a nervous habit that betrayed her mounting tension. Her curiosity, he realized, had crossed the line. It had become an obsession, a relentless hunger for a truth she could not possibly comprehend. The choice, when it came, was agonizingly clear. Alice would not retreat. Her kind never did. The only way to prevent chaos, to maintain what little control he had left, was to confront her. It would not be on her terms. It would be on his. He would lure her into his territory, into the heart of his nightmare. There, he would speak. Not as a monster, not as a warden, but as the man who understood the razor-thin line between sanity and utter oblivion. The confrontation was inevitable. He would control it or die trying. The hot, humid night air pressed in on them, thick as a shroud, smelling of damp earth and the distant, unseen things that stirred in the forest. Alice Crow, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, stood at the crumbling gate of the abandoned zoo. In her trembling hand, she clutched her smartphone, its screen a small, defiant beacon in the overwhelming darkness. The photos she had captured, spectral and terrifying, glowed from the display. The monstrous wolf form of Thomas, the writhing, translucent creature, its unearthly vibrations almost visible in the infrared spectrum. "I know," she said, her voice rising slightly, a tremor of fear threading through her attempt at journalistic steel. "I know what you are, what you're keeping in there. Tell me the truth, or I go to the press. Tonight." It was an ultimatum, a desperate gamble. She felt a surge of cold confidence, a belief that she held all the cards. She had not accounted for the quiet, ancient power that radiated from the man before her. Thomas Gray stood before her, a silhouette against the deeper gloom of the forest, his face unreadable in the scant moonlight. To Alice's profound surprise, he did not panic. He did not threaten. No desperate plea, no raw fear appeared in his eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, gravelly rasp, calm and utterly devoid of emotion, like water worn smooth by ancient stone. "I agree to talk," he said, the words hanging in the heavy air. "But only at night, and only inside the complex." The condition sent a shiver down Alice's spine, a cold dread that warred with a prickle of intense, feverish, journalistic intrigue. Inside the complex. The phrase hung in the air, a dark invitation. Hours later, the moon, a sliver of bone, had risen higher, casting long, skeletal shadows across the landscape. Alice, her mind a battlefield of terror and exhilaration, found herself pushing through the rusted, groaning gates of the zoo. The iron shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of the night, then clanged shut behind her, sealing her in. Each step on the overgrown gravel path echoed in the oppressive silence, her footsteps sounding impossibly loud. The air here was different, heavier, thick with a palpable physical presence that raised the hairs on her arms. It was the smell of damp concrete, old blood, ozone, and something else. Something rank and indescribably ancient, like stagnant water from a forgotten well. She stepped into another world, a nightmare made real. Thomas moved ahead of her, a silent, angular guide, leading her deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the complex. The pathways twisted and turned, overgrown with vines that snaked across the ground like grasping tendrils. The skeletal remains of cages loomed on either side, their rusted bars like broken teeth. The sounds, once muffled from the outside, were now immediate, terrifyingly close. A wet, slurping sound from a dark pit to her left. A low, rhythmic thump, 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 like a massive, unseen heart from somewhere deeper within. A high-pitched mechanical whine that set her teeth on edge. The smells were stronger, more disturbing. The sharp, acrid tang of something like industrial cleaner mixed with putrefaction. The metallic scent of fresh meat. And a strange, sweet odor that made her stomach churn. Alice caught glimpses. Fleeting silhouettes in the deepest shadows. The glint of multiple eyes reflecting the dim light. The sudden, unsettling movement of something too large, too fast, just at the periphery of her vision. She pressed her lips together, forcing down the scream that clawed at her throat. This was terrifying, yes, but it was also the story. The story that would break everything. The thrill. A cold, sharp blade cut through her fear, sharpening her senses, focusing her journalistic hunger. Thomas stopped before a particularly reinforced enclosure, its concrete walls thicker, its steel door barred with heavy bolts. "They are not evil," he said, his voice quiet, mournful. "Not in the way you understand it. They are mistakes, accidents, experiments that went catastrophically wrong." He spoke of them not as monsters, but as tragic consequences, twisted forms of life that, despite their horrific appearance, possessed their own strange intelligences, their own alien emotions. "I protect the town from them," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the dark cages, "and I protect them from people. From those who would destroy them out of fear, dissect them out of a perverse curiosity, and worst of all, weaponize them." His philosophy was a chilling one, a twisted kind of guardianship born of necessity. He was the barrier, the thin line. Then he led her to another enclosure, deeper within the complex, its walls humming faintly with an unseen energy. "This one," he said, his voice softer, "is different." As he pulled back a heavy, insulated curtain, Alice found herself staring into a reinforced chamber. There in the dim light stood silent number 7. Its scaly, gray-green form was vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, too numerous, its head featureless save for the 2 smooth, polished stones that were its eyes. It stood utterly still, but Alice felt it immediately, a deep, resonant hum, a presence that vibrated in her very bones, bypassing her ears entirely. She felt a wash of impressions, not words, but pure thought, a vast, ancient weariness, a profound sorrow, and an undeniable intelligence that stretched far beyond human comprehension. Thomas reached out, placing a hand on the cool, slick scales of the creature's arm. In that touch, Alice felt the mental connection, a direct line between man and monster. The creature was wise, she realized, in a way that defied explanation. she also felt its deep, unsettling instability, a barely contained tremor that affected the very air around it. It was like standing next to a live wire, humming with barely contained power. Alice stumbled back, her mind reeling. The scale of it, the horrifying, impossible reality of it, was almost too much to bear. Thomas Gray was not a madman, not in the way she had imagined. He was a man burdened by an impossible, nightmarish mission. He was a keeper of secrets that could tear the world apart. Her journalistic instinct, her unwavering belief that the truth must be revealed, now clashed violently with the terrifying reality before her. She questioned if the truth, the whole truth, was a poison. She returned to her rented room, the clamor of the creatures still echoing in her mind, the lingering scent of their unnatural presence clinging to her clothes. She sat on the edge of the bed, smartphone in hand, the images still there, burned into her retina. Her finger hovered over the send button, the gateway to publication, to a worldwide revelation. She hesitated, a deep, unsettling conflict raging within her. Then, a subtle pressure built in her mind, a whisper that was not her own. It urged her forward, reminded her of the injustices, the lies, the need for truth. In that moment, Alice knew she had not told Thomas everything. She had not revealed the true depth of her contacts, the shadowy figures who had sent her here, or their ultimate agenda. This was only the beginning. A strange, uneasy truce settled between Thomas and Alice, fragile as spun glass. Alice continued her nightly pilgrimages to the abandoned zoo, drawn by a morbid fascination and a gnawing sense of obligation. Thomas, ever the watchful sentinel, allowed her presence, his every movement a silent warning, his senses always on edge. Their conversations, initially wary and clipped, deepened, stretching into the pre-dawn hours. They shared fragments of information, tentative disclosures, like two wary animals circling each other. Yet even as they spoke, each held back, guarding their deepest secrets, a silent pact of unspoken suspicion humming beneath their words. One night, Thomas led her into a small, dusty office tucked away behind the main containment block, a place he rarely entered himself. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and the ghost of forgotten ambition. He gestured to a series of heavy, leather-bound journals and rusted steel filing cabinets. "The agency," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "Their records, encrypted, coded, filled with scientific jargon and chillingly detached observations." The documents painted a horrifying picture. Alice pored over them, deciphering the jargon, her journalistic training guiding her through the convoluted narratives. She learned of the creature's origins, not as natural evolution, but as the monstrous fruits of reckless biological experiments, desperate attempts to create super soldiers, organic weapons, and bioengineered assets. The entries spoke of catastrophic containment breaches, unforeseen mutations, and the agency's subsequent frantic efforts to bury their mistakes. Efforts that culminated in the creation of the zoo as a permanent secret holding facility. A cold knot of dread tightened in Alice's stomach. These were not monsters from folklore. They were man-made horrors, the chilling consequence of unchecked human hubris. Alice found herself increasingly torn, caught between the unyielding poles of her journalistic duty and a dawning, terrifying understanding of the catastrophe that would ensue if she revealed the truth. She saw the lines of profound weariness etched into Thomas's face, the raw loneliness that radiated from him like heat from a dying fire. She saw his unwavering devotion to this impossible, thankless mission, his solitary existence as the world's unwilling keeper of secrets. How could she expose him and everything he protected to a world that would undoubtedly react with panic, exploitation, and outright destruction? She began to see the creatures not as malevolent beasts, but as tragic, failed experiments, their existence a living testament to humanity's darkest impulses. Silent Number 7 in particular, with its deep, ancient wisdom and profound melancholy, began to represent a fragile, vital keystone in this impossible ecosystem. As days bled into weeks, Thomas noticed new, subtle signs of intrusion, more sophisticated than Alice's initial foray. His crude sensors, meticulously placed around the zoo's perimeter, registered strange, intermittent signals, not the familiar flutter of a deer or the heavy tread of a bear, but something electronic, surgical in its precision. He found small, subtly disguised cameras, expertly disguised as rocks or clumps of moss, near key access points, their lenses aimed directly at his more sensitive enclosures. Then, the unnerving discovery. His own security cameras, a salvaged system he had nursed back to life, had been hacked, their feeds periodically interrupted by static, then returning to normal, as if nothing had happened. Someone actively tested his defenses, probing for weaknesses. Someone far more experienced, far more dangerous than Alice Crowe. Alice, meanwhile, grew increasingly secretive. She took her phone calls in hushed whispers, often disappearing into her rented car for hours, driving to remote, unnamed spots miles outside of town. Thomas, invisible as a phantom in the night, used his heightened senses to track her. He caught snippets of conversation, coded words, veiled allusions. "The necessity of change," she murmured, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and conviction. "The truth about the lies." Then, the phrase that sent a cold spike of dread through Thomas's heart: "Freedom for the prisoners." He smelled the faint, lingering scent of other people on her clothes when she returned, unfamiliar scents that were not local. He heard the faint echo of other voices in her phone calls, not just a single contact, but a small, determined group. He pieced it together. Alice was not alone. She had colleagues, as she sometimes vaguely referred to them, fellow travelers on this ideological crusade. They shared her conviction, stoking it, using her as their eyes and ears on the ground. He caught a name once, whispered on a wind-tossed call: the zoologist. Another, a curt reference to the specialist, a security man. Then, a chilling, unsettling mention of the psychic. A man who claimed to hear voices from the earth. Thomas concluded that these accomplices had far more radical plans than mere journalistic exposure. They were not just seeking a story, they sought a revolution. The tension between Thomas and Alice stretched taut, a violin string pulled to its breaking point. Thomas confronted her directly, his voice low and dangerous, demanding to know about her contacts, about their true intentions. Alice, her face pale, lied convincingly and evaded his questions with practiced ease, her eyes betraying a deeper secret, a greater fear. He felt the net closing, the threads tightening around him and his charges. He knew with a bone-deep certainty that their fragile, uneasy truce was about to shatter. The storm was coming. Alice was a part of it. The woman was a former zoologist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, brilliant but disgraced, dismissed from a prestigious research facility for her radical, unethical experiments and her increasingly unhinged theories about the sentience of apex predators. her belief that all oppressed species deserved freedom. The man with the cold, rough voice was Blackwood, a mercenary, a former military special operations soldier, now disillusioned with the system, motivated by cold cash and a twisted sense of justice against governmental conspiracies. The third, the one with the resonant voice, was Simon Kane, a self-proclaimed psychic, charismatic, but dangerously unbalanced, who claimed to hear the voices of the earth and the whispers of ancient beings, and who had fixated on silent number 7 as the key to a new understanding of the world, a new era. Thomas felt a cold, hard certainty settle in his gut. This was far more serious than a mere journalistic exposé. These were not just curious academics or disgruntled soldiers. These were ideologues, driven by a dangerous cocktail of fanaticism and delusion. They believed, truly believed, that the monsters should be free, that their release was a revelation, not a catastrophe. He felt the net tightening around him, around his charges, around the unsuspecting town. The game had changed. He knew with a dreadful clarity that he was now the target. Thomas, shrouded in the humid night, felt the weight of the coming storm. The information he had gathered on Alice's accomplices formed a chilling mosaic in his mind, each piece fitting into a pattern of fanaticism and delusion. There was Dr. Evelyn Reed, the disgraced zoologist. Her brilliance curdled into a fervent religious conviction that all captive species, particularly those deemed monstrous by humanity, possessed an intrinsic right to liberation. She spoke of them with a chilling, detached reverence, viewing Thomas as a barbaric jailer, a tool of a repressive system that denied the world a profound truth. Her past was littered with ethical breaches, rumors of experiments that pushed the boundaries of life itself, and a dismissal from her university for her increasingly bizarre, though academically compelling, theories about the advanced consciousness of non-human predators. She saw the zoo not as a containment facility, but as a concentration camp, a place of oppression. Then there was the mercenary, Blackwood, a man forged in the crucible of clandestine warfare, a specialist in infiltration and security. His motivations were a complex tangle of cynicism and opportunism. Disillusioned by years of serving a system he had come to despise, he now hired himself out to those who sought to dismantle it and profit from its chaos. Money was a driving force, certainly, but beneath that, Thomas sensed a deep-seated anger, a desire to punish the powers that be, to expose their hypocrisy. He saw Thomas not as a protector, but as a government agent, an extension of the very system he loathed. Finally, the most unsettling of them all, Simon Kane, the self-proclaimed psychic. He was charismatic, certainly, capable of weaving elaborate narratives that were messianic, but his eyes held a manic gleam, a disturbing instability that revealed a mind unmoored from reality. He claimed to hear the ancient voices of the earth, the primal whispers of ancient beings, and he had latched onto silent number 7 as the ultimate key, the missing link to a new understanding of the universe. To Kane, Thomas was not just a jailer, but a blasphemer, an individual suppressing a divine truth, preventing humanity from achieving a higher state of consciousness. Their motives, disparate as they were, coalesced into a single terrifying goal: to release the creatures, to set them free, to force a revelation upon an unsuspecting world. They were convinced that Thomas was merely a puppet, a blind guardian of a lie, and that his carefully maintained containment was a crime against a higher truth. Thomas, in his relentless surveillance, discovered that Alice and her cadre were not just talking. They actively prepared for a full-scale operation. He intercepted fragments of conversations, plans being laid with frightening precision. They studied topographical maps of the zoo and the surrounding quarry, discussing points of entry, escape routes, weaknesses in his security. They acquired specialized equipment, cutting tools, climbing gear, specialized sonic emitters he could not quite identify. Their focus, chillingly, was on the old, abandoned quarry shafts that honeycombed the earth behind the zoo. They saw it as the ideal hiding place, a secure refuge for the creatures once released, a launching pad for their revelation. Thomas felt a creeping paranoia settle in, cold and damp as morning mist. He trusted no one, not even Alice, despite her fleeting moments of hesitation, her strained denials. His wolf instincts were honed to an excruciating degree. Every rustle, every distant sound, every shift in the wind signaled a threat. He patrolled his territory ceaselessly, scanning the tree line, searching for any subtle sign of invasion, any ripple in the carefully maintained illusion of peace. He worked with a desperate, frantic energy, fortifying the zoo against the coming assault. He rigged new traps, ingenious and brutal, hidden beneath layers of leaves and undergrowth. He reinforced the old locks with additional steel plates, welded shut weak points in the rusted cages, and even laid down crude, improvised booby traps along the approaches he knew they would use. He worked alone, his hands bleeding, his body aching, knowing that a single man, even one like him, could not withstand a well-prepared, determined group. The town, for its part, felt the shift. A subtle, irrational unease crept into the daily rhythm. Domestic animals grew restless, dogs barking at shadows, cats hissing at unseen things. Children, their imaginations more susceptible, whispered of strange voices drifting from the woods at night, of eerie melodies carried on the wind that made their skin crawl. It was a premonition, a collective shudder that rippled through the populace, a subconscious acknowledgement of the impending horror. Thomas made one last, desperate attempt to reason with Alice. He cornered her one evening as she left the library, his voice low and urgent, a raw plea in his eyes. He warned her that she was playing with fire, that releasing silent number 7 would not lead to enlightenment, but to unmitigated catastrophe. He described in stark, chilling detail the raw power of the creature, its capacity to unravel minds, to tear apart the very fabric of reality. Alice listened, her face pale, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed, a text message from one of her accomplices, pulling her back into their orbit. She hardened, her resolve stiffening. The collective pressure of her compatriots proved too great to resist. Thomas watched her walk away, a grim certainty settling in his heart. The time for talking was over. The collaborators, in their delusional fervor, had made their decision. He saw their shapes gathering at the perimeter of the zoo under the deepening shroud of night, their gear glinting in the faint moonlight, their preparations complete. This night was the decisive one. The quiet shattered. The monsters rose. The pain tore through Thomas with the force of a branding iron, searing him awake. A sharp, burning agony seized his muscles, cramping them into rigid knots, leaving him gasping, unable to move. It was not the familiar, comforting ache of transformation, but something alien, something insidious. Poison. They had poisoned him. His mind, usually sharp as a razor, felt sluggish, encased in a thick, suffocating fog. He tried to rise, to force his body into its wolf form, but his limbs would not obey, heavy as lead. The power, the primal surge of the beast, was a faint, mocking whisper just beyond his reach. He knew with a sickening certainty that this was their doing, Alice's accomplices. This was a cruel, calculated move to strip him of his strength, to render him helpless. Through the haze of pain he heard it, the creak of rusted hinges, the groan of metal, the distinct sickening thud of a heavy gate swinging open. His eyes, though unfocused, darted to the bank of monitors. Static. Every single one. Then, a sudden horrifying flicker of movement on the screen that fed from the main containment block. A glimpse of something dark, something fast, disappearing into the blackness. The locks were broken. The doors were flung open. A wave of panicked, chaotic sounds erupted from the depths of the zoo. A guttural bellow, a high-pitched metallic shriek, the unmistakable wet-tearing sound of flesh, a chorus of growls and screams that rose and fell like a nightmare symphony. Monsters were on the loose. A cold wave of primal terror, a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel in decades, washed over him, momentarily eclipsing the poison's agony. From the crackling speaker of his old, dusty radio, set to the local emergency band, grim news trickled in from the town. A breathless dispatcher's voice, laced with barely contained panic, spoke of strange events. The first reports were dismissed as isolated incidents. Pets found dead, their bodies strangely mutilated, not by conventional predators, but as if something had sucked them dry. A farmer called in, his voice trembling, describing how his entire flock of sheep had vanished overnight, leaving only an eerie, pulsating hum in the air. Then more terrifying reports stacked up. People, huddled in their homes, called to report hearing strange voices, whispers, faint melodic tunes drifting from the forest, infiltrating their dreams, seeping into their waking minds. This was the effect of silent number 7, he realized, its psychic field now unchecked, radiating outward, driving the town slowly, inexorably towards madness. Then the worst. A remote farmhouse, 5 miles outside town, its lights still blazing, the front door ripped clean off its hinges. The entire family was simply gone. Their breakfast still on the table, their beds unmade, their cars in the driveway. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just an empty house, a void where life had been. Thomas, his body racked with tremors, fought to think, to comprehend the scale of the disaster. He pushed himself off the floor, crawling on hands and knees, every movement a fresh stab of pain. He knew the creatures, knew their instincts. Some, the less aggressive, fled, seeking the deep cover of the woods, a return to a primal freedom. Others, the truly dangerous ones, were drawn to the light, to the warmth, to the helpless, unsuspecting prey of the town. He felt their presence in the forest, a shifting, malevolent cloud of predatory instinct, all of it funneled, terrifyingly, towards the unsuspecting human population. Beyond the physical threat, Thomas felt a deeper, more insidious pressure, the psychic impact. Some of his charges, even the ones he had kept most contained, possessed dormant telepathic abilities, capable of generating waves of pure panic, existential horror, or outright madness. With the carefully calibrated dampeners of their enclosures now breached, and the stabilizing influence of silent number 7 gone, that psychic energy radiated outwards, a silent, unseen tide of terror. It amplified now by the creature's freedom, twisting the air, making every shadow writhe. He knew instinctively what their primary target had been: silent number 7. He felt its presence now, a strange, oscillating vibration far to the west, beyond the quarry, its unique, mind-bending field reaching out, touching every living thing. They wanted to control it, to unleash its power on the world. A raw, animalistic fury began to simmer beneath the layers of poison-induced weakness. The venom, designed to subdue, now stoked a deeper, more ancient rage within him. He fought his own body, every muscle screaming in protest, every nerve ending ablaze. He transformed. He regained control, becoming the wolf. Only then, only in that primal, unleashed form, could he stop this chaos, reclaiming what was his. Despite the haze, despite the blurring edges of his vision, Thomas knew with an absolute, undeniable certainty who was responsible. He smelled Alice. He smelled her accomplices, the sharp chemical tang of the zoologist, the faint gunpowder and steel of the mercenary, the cloying, sickly sweetness of the psychic. He felt their self-satisfaction, their absolute terrifying conviction in their mad plan. They had unleashed hell. He, the poisoned, weakened watchman, was the only one who could put it back. He stopped them, at any cost. The world blurred around Thomas, a dizzying swirl of pain and rage. The poison clawed at his muscles, burning, but a deeper, far more ancient fire now roared within him. He dragged himself towards the reinforced room, every inch an agony, his mind a singular, burning point of focus. Transformation. He threw himself against the steel door, clawing at the thick, cold metal, whimpering a sound both human and animal. His bones, already brittle from the venom, ground, snapped, rearranged themselves with an audible, sickening series of cracks. His tattered clothes shredded, fluttering to the floor like discarded skin. A guttural roar, half man, half beast, tore from his throat, silencing the screams within the house, momentarily silencing the deeper screams from the woods. He transformed. When the last spasm passed, a colossal gray-furred form stood panting in the ruins of the room, its hackles bristling, its massive head raised, scenting the air. It was a wolf, a creature of myth and nightmare, its eyes glowing with a feral, primal intelligence. Thomas, the man, was gone. The alpha had risen. The town, meanwhile, succumbed to a slow, creeping hysteria. What started as whispers and isolated incidents blossomed into full-blown panic. Residents, initially quick to dismiss the strange sounds and disappearances as wild animals, now retreated behind locked doors, their faces ashen. From the deep, oppressive darkness of the surrounding woods, new sounds drifted, high-pitched, piercing shrieks that were not human, deep, resonant thumps that vibrated through the very foundations of houses, and the terrifying, incessant hum of silent number 7's psychic field, now completely unleashed, weaving threads of anxiety and madness into the night air. Shadows, too large, too fast, flickered at the edges of the streetlights, darting between houses, melting back into the tree line before anyone got a clear look. Terror had found a foothold. Thomas's wolf burst from the confines of his property, a blur of gray fur and raw power. He did not run. He flowed, a silent predatory current through the familiar landscape. His senses, sharpened to an impossible degree, locked onto the trail of Alice and her accomplices. He followed their scent, a complex cocktail of fear, human sweat, and that cloying chemical tang he now associated with their insidious presence. He followed the signs of chaos they had left in their wake: shattered fence posts, overturned trash cans, the faint, lingering scent of creatures he knew had escaped. He saw the telltale gouges on tree trunks where the skitterer had scurried past, the deep, sucking footprints near a marshy pond where the amphibian predator had briefly rested before its demise on the highway. He passed a crumpled, abandoned pickup truck, its windows shattered, the faint scent of human blood clinging to the upholstery. A desperate struggle took place here. He understood now the varied paths of his former charges. Some, the less aggressive, fled, their primitive instincts driving them away from human habitation, seeking the deepest, most untouched parts of the forest, a return to a primal freedom. Others, however, driven to a frenzy by the unleashed psychic influence of Silent Number 7, became increasingly aggressive, drawn by an instinct for conflict, for destruction. He caught the faint, lingering scent of a fear-crazed farmer, the desperate bleating of his livestock, and then the sickening tang of blood, knowing that some of his creatures had succumbed to their base instincts, acting out the horror they embodied. He felt Silent Number 7's presence like a beacon, a pulsating hum that drew him relentlessly westward. Alice and her cohorts used it as a lure, a powerful living magnet, drawing it deeper into the earth towards the abandoned quarry shafts. He knew their intent: to showcase it, to reveal it to the world from the depths of those ancient mines, transforming it from a contained anomaly into a symbol of their perverse truth. They wanted to control its power, to wield it as a weapon against the very order Thomas had dedicated his life to preserving. As he neared the quarry, the encounters grew more frequent, more brutal. He found himself confronted by his own released creatures, driven to a frenzy by the psychic noise. He faced the towering, multi-limbed thing from the old reptile house, its scales slick with moisture, its hungry maw gaping. He fought the screaming, winged horror that had escaped the aviary, its talons sharp, its cries capable of shattering glass. These were not hunts for food, but savage, desperate skirmishes for dominance, for territory. He did not kill them unless absolutely necessary, his innate connection to their monstrous forms giving him a unique understanding of their weaknesses. He showed them his power, his size, his absolute dominance, forcing them to submit, to scatter, to acknowledge him as the alpha. The transformation was complete. Thomas was no longer just a man cursed with lycanthropy. He was the caretaker, far more. He was a primal force, a raw embodiment of the wild, his very being merged with the role of guardian. His wolf form was not just a disguise. It was an extension of his will, a weapon forged in fear and tempered by responsibility. He was the protector of his territory, human or monstrous, against any intrusion, any threat. The quarry loomed ahead, a jagged black maw against the pale moonlight. The air here was heavy with the scent of stagnant water and cold rock, mixed with the sharp metallic tang of human fear and anticipation. He saw them. Silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon, gathered around the gaping entrance to one of the deepest shafts, stood the figures: Alice, the zoologist, the mercenary, and the psychic. In their center, pulsating faintly, its vibrations thrumming on the very edge of Thomas's heightened senses, was Silent Number 7. the final, decisive confrontation. He crouched low, a massive gray shadow gathering himself. The hunt was over. The battle was about to begin. The silence of the quarry was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the rasp of Thomas's wolf's ragged breath and the distant, frantic cries from the town. The towering cliffs, sheer and unforgiving, rose like jagged teeth around the moonlit basin. The entrances to the old mine shafts, dark and foreboding, gaped like hungry mouths, promising only oblivion. The air, thick with the scent of damp rock and ancient dust, crackled with a palpable tension, a premonition of violence that hummed on Thomas's heightened senses. He moved with the predator's silent grace, a massive gray blur against the darker shadows, closing the distance between himself and the figures huddled at the deepest shaft entrance. Alice, the zoologist, the mercenary, and the psychic were silhouetted against the faint, shimmering glow of silent number 7, which pulsed with a soft, internal light. Thomas attacked without warning, a snarling blur of teeth and fur. The battle was brutal, swift, and utterly unfair. The mercenary Blackwood reacted with lightning speed, his hand already on the holstered handgun at his hip. He was a professional, no doubt, but he faced something beyond his training. He fired, the sharp cracks of the handgun echoing deafeningly in the quarry, rounds stinging Thomas's hide. But the wolf was too fast, too enraged. Thomas lunged, his massive jaws snapping shut on the mercenary's arm, tearing muscle and bone. Blackwood screamed a raw animal sound, dropping his weapon as Thomas flung him away like a rag doll, sending him sprawling against the cold rock face, his arm grotesquely twisted. The zoologist, Evelyn Reed, shrieked, a high-pitched, scientific sound of horror. She scrambled back, frantically tapping on a device in her hand, projecting a calming signal toward silent number 7, controlling its vibrations, turning its power against Thomas. She talked to the creature, whispering commands, appealing to its higher sentience. Thomas was already upon her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He knocked the device from her hand with a swipe of his paw, tearing her jacket, sending her sprawling face first into the dirt, whimpering. He did not kill her, but left her broken, bleeding, and certainly out of the fight. Simon Kane, the psychic, was a different problem. As Thomas advanced, Kane's eyes widened, a manic gleam replacing the fear. He reached out with both hands, his face contorted in a silent scream, attempting to establish a mental link with silent number 7, to bend its monstrous will to his own, to direct its power as a weapon against Thomas. A wave of pure, concentrated psychic energy slammed into Thomas's mind, a chaotic maelstrom of fear, anger, and fragmented thoughts. It was like 1,000 voices screaming at once, overwhelming his senses, shattering his control. But Thomas, the ancient protector, the alpha of his own nightmares, resisted. He had lived with such forces for decades, had harnessed them, understood them in a way Kane never could. He pushed back, his own raw, primal consciousness slamming into Kane's fragile mind. The clash was instantaneous, violent. Kane screamed, a sound that tore at the very fabric of the quarry. His mental link with silent number 7, tenuous and forced, snapped like a dry twig. The creature, suddenly free of Kane's manipulative influence, throbbed with a deeper, more erratic intensity, its light flaring, then dimming. It was lost, unleashed, a beacon of raw, untamed power without a guide. Kane himself crumpled to the ground, writhing in convulsions, froth bubbling at his lips, his mind shattered by the backlash of his own broken connection. In that instant, as silent number 7 lost its fragile moorings, the true scale of the catastrophe became horrifyingly clear. The creature, Thomas realized, was not simply a monster to be contained. It was an indicator, a living tuning fork, its very presence a delicate balance that kept the other abominations in check. Without its guiding, subduing hum, the monsters already roaming the town lost their last vestiges of control. From the distance, carried on the night wind, a new wave of sound erupted. Not just isolated screams, but a chorus of terror. The undeniable sounds of widespread destruction, of raw panic. Houses splintered, cars flipped. The very fabric of the small town tore itself apart. Everything began to unravel. Thomas, bleeding from multiple wounds where Blackwood's bullets had found purchase, his muscles screaming from the poison that still coursed through him, fought with a desperate, inhuman fury. He had incapacitated the mercenary and the zoologist, their bodies broken but alive, left to face the consequences of their actions. The psychic lay twitching, his mind a ruin. Only Alice remained, her face pale, her eyes wide with a horrified comprehension of what she had unleashed. She stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, unbridled chaos she had helped bring about. Thomas ignored her. His focus was on silent number 7. The creature faltered, its internal light flickering, its resonant hum fading. It died. Too long away from its meticulously regulated enclosure, too long from its specific energy source, its strange, non-biological life force drained away. He knew it then, with a profound, aching certainty. He needed to get it back. Not because it could be contained, not because it could stop the unraveling, but because it was a symbol of control, however broken. With a final, desperate surge of his last remaining strength, Thomas, blood staining his gray fur, ignored the gnawing pain, ignored the distant screams, ignored the chaos that engulfed the town. He lunged forward, his massive jaws gently, carefully, closing around one of silent number 7's fading limbs. He would not kill it. He would return it, though its life already drained. He began to drag the dying creature, heavy as wet stone, back towards the ruins of the zoo, towards the symbol of everything he had tried to protect. The town burned, but his mission, shattered as it was, remained. Thomas, his massive gray form streaked with blood and grime, dragged the dying silent number 7 back into the ruins of the zoo. The creature, its light almost extinguished, its faint hum barely audible, was a dead weight in his jaws, its life draining away with every painful step. The enclosures, already weakened by the sabotage, crumbled completely. Concrete walls had fractured, steel bars were twisted like licorice sticks, and the few remaining locks hung uselessly, shattered by the escaping creatures. He felt the profound, chilling truth in his bones. Everything he had built, everything he had painstakingly maintained for decades, could not be held. The illusion of control had shattered forever. He laid silent number 7 gently in the remains of its enclosure, a gesture of profound, heartbreaking futility. The creature's light flickered once more, a last dying ember, then went out. The faint hum ceased. It was gone. The ultimate indicator of balance, the silent witness to his impossible burden, had finally passed into oblivion. In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of his life's work, covered in the blood of his enemies and the grime of their chaos, Thomas made a decision. It was unexpected, Sudden, a raw, visceral understanding that slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. His role as jailer, as warden, was over. The game had changed. The old agreement was null and void. A guttural rumble started deep in his chest, a sound that began as a wolf's growl but shifted, transformed, taking on a new, rougher timbre, human in its cadence but laced with the ancient power of the beast. It was his voice, deeper, rasping, primal. With a heavy, deliberate movement, he turned towards the remaining unbroken enclosures, the ones where creatures, terrified and cowering, still awaited their fate. With a powerful swipe of his massive paw, he tore the remaining locks from their hinges. One by one, he flung open the doors, each creak and groan an invitation, a declaration. "I am no longer a jailer," he rasped, his voice echoing in the ruined complex, carrying with it the primal authority of an alpha. "But I remain a caretaker. This is my town. You come out only by my rules." A strange quiet fell. Most of the creatures, those still within their crumbling confines, reacted instantly to his voice. The more aggressive ones, the ones that had been rampaging, froze, their feral eyes locking onto his. They felt his new, overwhelming power, the raw, undeniable authority that radiated from him. Their aggression drained away, replaced by an instinctual primal deference. Others, the less violent, the more subdued, simply lay down on the ravaged concrete, their monstrous forms settling in obedience. A few, the most terrified or the most untamable, simply bolted, disappearing into the depths of the forest, fleeing his unspoken command. But none of them turned their aggression on the town. Not anymore. Thomas, wounded, bleeding, but profoundly, fiercely alive, stood in the heart of the ruined zoo. He was no longer just a man. He was no longer just a wolf. He was something more, something new. He was the alpha, the leader, the shield, and the terrifying primal guide for these creatures in their strange new world. He was them, and they were him, a symbiotic horror, a living, breathing balance. 6 months later, the small southern town settled back into its familiar somnolent rhythm. The air, thick with the scent of pine and humid earth, once again held that unique, frozen-in-time quality. The panic receded like a bad dream. The authorities, the local sheriff, and then the federal agents who had swarmed the area in the chaotic aftermath, conducted their investigations. They found abandoned cars, signs of a desperate struggle near the quarry, a crumpled mercenary, a babbling zoologist, and a gibbering, broken psychic, all of whom were whisked away to anonymous federal facilities for observation. The missing journalist, Alice Crow, was written off as another casualty. Her disappearance attributed to the strange incident and the wild animals that wandered into the area. The town, in its collective denial, accepted the official explanation. Life resumed. The broken windows were replaced, the scattered debris cleared, the faint bloodstains washed away by summer rains. Domestic animals no longer vanished without a trace. The strange, unsettling voices that haunted the night ceased. The piercing screams from the woods were gone. The town lived on, oblivious, unaware that its newfound peace was not a return to normalcy, but a quiet, fragile truce guarded by an invisible, primal force. The forest became more vibrant, more alive.